So I'm gonna talk a little bit about some of the models we use in design as well. So we're using ADDIE to structure and stage and sequence how you're going to develop the resource or the scenario for your classroom. And when we talk about technology and education, and in this project particularly, we're interested in the kinds of ideas and designs and technologies that really bring about change in the classroom, that are quite different and distinct from what you do every day. So in the DEIMP project, we're interested in transformative scenarios of learning. So where can the technology not just substitute what we do in the classroom already? So for example, using an iPad like a book, or maybe there's a quiz you can have in an iBook, which is great. It enhances learning. It can potentially enhance, but it's still very similar to what we do every day. And what we're aiming for and what we're trying to realize and achieve in DEIMP is really transformational learning. So when you're designing your scenarios and you're thinking about Pi Day in March, in a few weeks' time, you're thinking about a spelling application, how can you create with your students as well? So a big part of design is to co-design, is to work with others. So that's why we've had some questions in our session this evening, because we're trying to be participatory and collaborate together, because the old phrase we have in English is that two heads are better than one. So when we talk together, when we share ideas and we exchange ideas, we're often in a position to be better informed and maybe better inspired in how we think about design. So when you're thinking about your scenario and your mobile innovation and change in the classroom and using the mobile apps or technologies that you have, how can you modify what you do every day and even redefine it? How can you do something really, really different? And again, it's not that we're trying to do something new because that's cool only, but how does that new activity or that new use of the technology and new type of learning that's made possible with mobile and with the technology, how does that add value to what you do every day in the classroom? So that's our broad kind of vision. And this is a model we call SAMR. It's the transformative approach that we're really interested in, the SAMR model, in terms of doing something, we might call it even revolutionary, or something that redefines what you do in the classroom. So we've quite an ambitious agenda in DEIMP to do something really new. But as teachers, we know that new isn't always good. Tradition is very important in teaching, and the old methods as well. So how do you combine what you do every day and extend that and make that new through the technology? And most importantly, can you do that in a way that really enhances your students' experience in your classroom? So we might move it on, Sean. Thanks a million. So when we talk about design, some of the other principles that you need to keep in mind, and we call them the 2 Ps of design. And they're like peas in a pod. They go together, they go hand in glove. And one is that you want to be guided by what you do in the classroom. You want to do something that adds value. You want to be, the fancy word we use is participatory. You want to maybe talk to your students. You understand them, you're their teacher. You might want to, in some cases, talk to parents. You might want to talk to your other teachers in your class. It's great to see one of the projects you're talking about working together on Pi Day on a maths innovation, and it's something new in your maths teaching. So can you involve other teachers? Can you talk to others? Can you get other points of view? Can you talk to us? We're a resource in the MOOC, in DEIMP as well, and to our other colleagues. So how can you be participatory? How can you get participation by your learners? But at the other side, we also want to listen to what theory has to tell us. We want to be inspired by theory, or we want to be principled. So as well as being guided by what works well in our classrooms, what kind of theories are there for education that can inspire us and guide us and give us an insight into what we might do that can help us to formulate a vision of learning with the technology. And we're actually very lucky in DEIMP and today to have a model that we can draw on, which we call the iPAQ model. And iPAQ has been developed by researchers within the DEIMP project and colleagues from outside the project as well, but primarily through the project. And you'll have available to you the mobile learning toolkit. And this is really useful because it'll give you ideas. It'll give you those things that you need to be looking for and you need to be designing with these things in your mind. And there are 3 broad areas within iPAQ. What we would recommend is the more of each of these 3 areas you can have in your design, the more redefinitional or revolutionary or innovative it can be, or transformative it can be. And we call these the signature pedagogies, or the signature concepts within the iPAQ framework. And the first one is personalization. And this relates to how much is the experience personalized for your learners. So when you think about your mobile learning scenario and you want to make it as impactful, as useful, as beneficial for your students, think about their agency. Will your students be able to do things that they decide to do? Will they have agency in their learning? Will they have control over the learning experience? Will they have control over where they learn, the place of learning? How much will they have control? Will they be able to control the pace of learning? So will they be able to learn at home perhaps? Will there be a field trip? Will there be something that they do alongside the classroom, not just in the classroom? Do they have autonomy? Will they be able to choose the learning content? Or do you decide it primarily as the teacher? Or do you decide it together? Do they work together? That's a big part as we talk about as well in iPAQ. So personalization is a big aspect of what you should be thinking about for your scenario. How personalized can you make it? How customized can you make it for your learners? Are you choosing apps that are specific for them, for their age and stage of learning? When you think about the spelling mobile scenario, you're obviously going to be selecting apps that are helpful to them given their age and the kinds of stage they might be at in their learning and development. The second important construct, and it's really important with technology and particularly with mobile, as well as personalization, is collaboration. So will there be a possibility or opportunity for the students to converse, to talk to each other? Will they be able to gather data together? Will they be able to share data? And if you look again in more detail at the mobile learning toolkit, that'll give you a lot of ideas for what you can potentially do in your mobile scenario. So will there be opportunity for collaboration for students to learn with each other? Because we know that there's great connectivity available with these new devices. We all the time are using these devices now, increasingly, both in and outside of education. So how can you leverage, how can you exploit the particular affordances or opportunities of these kinds of mobile devices to really make your mobile learning scenario collaborative? So they're the first 2. Any questions so far, folks? Does anyone want to interject? Anyone have any? Are you thinking about personalizing the experience with the technology? You're probably already thinking about collaboration. How can this be collaborative for my learners in the classroom? Anyone want to contribute there so far? Don't be shy. Okay, we can move on. We maybe will hold that. We have a question at the end to get you thinking, as we've done in the other parts of the session this evening. And thirdly then, authenticity. So, and here we talk about the task, the tool, and the setting. So to what extent will the mobile learning scenario that you come up with, that you create, support authentic learning? How much does the setting, which could be virtual now, as I remember, as well as physical, allow pupils to experience learning in a real world setting? You've probably heard of John Dewey, the famous educational philosopher. And one of his major philosophies, if you want students to study history, allow them to be a historian. If you want them to learn about spelling and language, get them to write like an author. If you want them to learn about science, get them to be a scientist. So how authentic is your scenario? And can you promote this? Can you make it more authentic for students? Also, to what extent is your mobile scenario something that students will enjoy for an intrinsic motivation, that they actually, how much does it relate to their world, to what they're interested in? And we know that as teachers, good teaching connects the curriculum to the real world. It does that naturally. So how can you promote that with mobile devices in your classroom? And also, crucially, is there a possibility for real world practitioners for them to connect, for example, with historians, to connect with maybe databases that have been developed by scientists, for example. If you're thinking about mathematics and Pi Day, what kind of resources? I think of the census at school, for example, where kids can do statistical type of activities using the census at school, which has been developed by teachers and by educational professionals and scientists. And again, how authentic is the context that they're learning in the setting? So what we would say is, when you're thinking about your mobile learning scenario, you've great ideas there, those that are on tonight that you've shared with us. How personalized can you make it? How collaborative can you make it? And can you make it authentic for your students? And if you can do that, if you can make it as personalized, as collaborative, and as authentic as possible, we're inclined to believe you'll be more successful. It'll be more of a transformative mobile learning scenario, and more of using the technology in a way that really adds value and changes the way we teach and learn. So I hope that's clear. And again, refer to the Mobile Learning Toolkit, mobilelearningtoolkit.com/iPAQ-framework.html. It's in the MOOC, and that'll give you lots of questions to really prompt you and make you think about your learning. So another tool that we'd like to introduce you to, again, it's late in the evening, sorry, it's probably the more theoretical stuff a little bit, but some of the other things, this is what we call conjecture maps, and these are design tools. They're meant to help us to think about design. And a conjecture map is basically like a lesson plan, but you write it in a much more condensed format, and you do it in landscape from left to right. And on the left-hand side, so, okay, you're taking iPAQ, you're being principled, you're taking the iPAQ framework with personalization, authenticity, and collaboration. But the conjecture map starts to get you digging into the idea of your design, the concept. We call it sometimes the design concept, or conjecture map, or conjecture is what Bill Sandoval, who developed these, calls it originally. So on the left-hand side is a hypothesis about learning. So your hypothesis will probably be something like, mobile learning can enhance Pi Day when students do a certain set of activities. So what it is it's a kind of a high-level vision of learning. And then what you do is you move across the map, and the second box has the embodiment. And the embodiment then will be the tools and materials. So I have this vision of learning, and that's your first box on the left. The second box, then the embodiment. So what tools are going to help me? What materials? How am I going to structure the activities for students? How are students going to work? Are they going to be on their own? Are they going to work with, maybe you bring in other teachers, they work in pairs, they work in groups. They might do it might be a workshop type of format. It might be a flipped classroom. And then how are they going to talk to each other? Are there going to be prompts for them for learning? Are there going to be certain questions like we've tried to use tonight in our session? And then, as Sean said at the start, when you're thinking about design, it isn't always the sequential, the AD model or the ADDIE model is sequential, but you're always thinking about how you evaluate your design. That's always in the back of your mind. And then if you look at the mediating processes, so what can you observe in your classroom that tells you that this is a really good mobile scenario? And also, what can students produce? What are their artifacts? What can they produce in the classroom? Is it an iBook? Is it a MOOC? Maybe you get them to design their own MOOC. Do you get them to design their own resources? Do you get them to design a digital story? Do you get them to design a poster? Do you get them to design an animation? Do you get them to draw a beautiful sketch, for example? What artifacts can they produce that show that there's learning going on? And then at the end, you hope the outcomes will be really great learning in your classroom and really interested and motivated students. If you were to ask any teacher probably in the world to boil down what's teaching, it's motivation and it's good learning at the end, or together, hand in glove. So actually, Sean, if you move us on then, so this is just a more specific conjecture map about scientific argumentation. And again, what you're doing is, this is just getting us thinking about our design. And particularly what we want to always bear in mind in our mobile learning scenario are those 3 iPAQ principles. How can I make this collaborative for my students? How can I make it real and authentic? And how can I make it personalized for them? And you can see here, this conjecture, it talks about, it has a high level vision that scientific argumentation requires discussion where you justify claims. We know that as teachers. The good science teacher will get their students to give a justification for why certain phenomena appear in the lab. And you can see there then the embodiment. So that what's the embodiment here? They're going to get them to do something in the laboratory with experimental resources. They're going to get the students to work together in collaborative teams, inquiring about something. And then how does the teacher know? What are the mediating processes? How does the teacher know that this has been a success? Well, the students are going to use data to support their explanations, and the students won't be happy to swallow an answer from a book. They're going to demand a justification for scientific phenomena. And then at the end, what can your students do? They can understand the epistemology of certain phenomena in science, and they can produce good arguments in science.